Do you feel like these are unfair questions of somebody within a department of that size and scope? Do you feel that it's somewhat unfair?
You have a particular thing you really want to talk about and you're asking me other questions, but I don't think it's unfair to ask me about the audit. It's absolutely the case that the United States military should be able to pass an audit, and we've got to be on that pathway to get there.
But don't you think that that does speak to the larger point that we're trying to get at, which is good journalism uncovers corruption? And
okay, I mean, good journalism does uncover corruption, but I'm not sure these two things are linked. An audit is not.
But they are.
Okay, so you need to explain to me, do you understand what an audit does and the degree to which it is linked to the question that you're asking?
I believe so.
Okay, go ahead. Give me your explanation.
No, I don't mind learning. So what I would suggest is that the audit that they have in the military doesn't really look at whether or not there's efficacy. It's just whether they got delivered the thing that they ordered. And
that is any audit. That is any audit. That is true.
But generally, those audits aren't $400 billion for Raytheon and $1.7 trillion for a plane that doesn't seem to be doing. Like, there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse within a system.
Audits and waste, fraud, and abuse are not the same thing. So let's decompose these pieces for a moment. Then
please educate me on
sure.
What...
Okay. So what's the context to this? This is the Deputy Defense Secretary for, I think, the Pentagon, and Jon Stewart's interviewing her about the Pentagon failing its 7th audit. So they have an 850 billion annual budget, and they can't say where that money has been spent. And
63%.
And instead of coming here humbly, trying to explain why that could possibly be, she's gone for nuclear level condensation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And do you know what an audit is? An audit is meant to show you where money's been spent. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
It's not complicated. The reason why we're picking this video, I've spent a lot of time in Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Sudan. You guys have spent a lot of time in Africa. When you travel outside of Africa, the thing that frustrates me the most is the way they talk about corruption as if it's an issue.
It's an inborn trait.
We are corrupt.
Africans are naturally corrupt.
And this is the reason. There's nothing more corrupt than having 850 billion unaccounted for that you've raised from taxpayers, and you can't explain where that money's been gone. And when you're questioned about it, this is the response. This is the response of somebody that's unaccountable. Yeah. This is how a head teacher used to speak to me at school, because I knew I was a student, there ain't nothing I could do. This isn't somebody who is a public servant that's worried in any way about the answer that they might give them in trouble. This is someone giving an answer saying, what are you going to do about it?
That's what it is.
What are you going to do about it?
It's what it is.
The point that got to me was when she tried to muddle the waters when it comes to good journalism and uncovering corruption. And she says those two things are not linked. And he goes like, yeah,
of course they are.
Absolutely, they are linked. And it's an attempt to like telling him to keep to his lane. Stick to journalism, I will stick to the Pentagon.
Messing up,
It's because she sees corruption as something that happens over there. She's so institutionalized part of this culture, and she sees this as an agency that is above any scrutiny.
They hold others accountable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when she's talking about corruption, she's like, well, we're not talking about Nigeria out here. We're using the wrong word. We can say corruption. We haven't done an audit, but it's coming. Just give us a few more years. Maybe we'll do it after 12
maybe
annual budgets, 15.
What's also interesting is that the audit system that they use now was only introduced in 2017, right? And they've been failing it. So for a nation that claims to be so civilized, so ahead, why is that even just when it was introduced? It just means they just didn't feel a need. They don't explain themselves to nobody, but then they hold everybody else accountable. Everybody needs to explain themselves to America.
I think just on the corruption thing, there's this saying that Americans are not considered corrupt because they call it lobbying, and you can see it in the sort of revolving door where, you know, someone works in Raytheon, basically in the military-industrial complex. After their term, immediately the next administration comes in, suddenly they're in the defense ministry, things of that sort. But you have these really huge expense, these 800 billion. Usually it goes to these companies like Boeing, like Raytheon. So they, in essence, just financing themselves, but they're not calling it corruption, because these very same lobbies that Raytheon, etc., they're the ones who still buy these positions in government. And an even shocking stat is that from 1998, I believe, to 2015, the actual number is actually $21 trillion that cannot be accounted for in the Pentagon. And while this is happening, you know, you have hundreds of thousands of people in the US who are homeless. You have, you know, healthcare basically non-existence, infrastructure crumbling. Even if just half of this money was used to address these social problems, I think America will progress really far. But since they're very tunnel visioned in terms of being a destructive force in the world, so that they don't really think that the Pentagon deserves any less money. As you know, right before the conversation, we said they could probably hit $1 trillion in the coming years. But
I think there's more worrying implication than their own people.
Yeah, it's
etc.
global
I
for sure.
think the fact that you can't account for it publicly is because you're doing nefarious activities that you do not want to declare publicly.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at, I've been to Nicaragua, look at the whole Nicaragua Contra fiasco, yeah? So, President Ronald Reagan went to Congress, tried to get money for these Contra far-right rebels. Congress denied him, so then he managed to get the money through other means. Yeah, I won't say more than that, but through other means.
Yeah.
Some research suggests through the cocaine industry, which was then being funneled into inner city black communities. But so that was what, in the 1980s. Now they don't even have to account for the money. So what nefarious activities are they supporting throughout our continent? We have acceleration of terrorist activities in the Sahel. You know, the viewers can make up their own mind about that. Again, don't want to get in any trouble. And then just one correction, you said they go from Raytheon to a defense minister. It's actually the other way around. So if you look at Dick Cheney, he goes from the VP, doing the bidding of these weapons industries, and then goes to work or be a shareholder or on the board of directors for these. So you're already doing the bidding of the weapons industry while you're in government office.
Yeah, you know you go there.
So you're making policies that are intended for your life after office.
Retirement package.
And there's nothing more corrupt than that. There's nothing more corrupt than that. That's not what your salary is based on. Your salary is based on, you're the Vice President of the United States. You are meant to look out for the interest of the United States and its people, not for a multinational weapons manufacturer who make money when bombs are dropped. And when bombs are dropped, it doesn't make anyone safer. Not the country dropping the bombs, not the country receiving the bombs.
I think just to your early example of what nefarious activities could be conducted, in 2014, let's remember, the U.S. Congress was not aware that American soldiers were operating in Niger. It took an ambush for the United States to realize that, we have our soldiers operating in Niger, and which caused a whole storm. And I mean, back to the revolving door thing, the Cheney, that's an example of him being in government and then going to the private sector. But then looking at the example of, say, Lloyd Austin, for example, who was in Boeing and then came as... So I think it's more of a revolving door. You could be in government, then go to the private sector, or in the private sector and then come back to government.
Don't forget the people who end up paying the price for the product that the Pentagon comes up with, like the Palestinians. Given the thousands of bombs and ammunition that the US gives to Israel and has been given to other countries like Ukraine, fueling these conflicts and keeping them going for years on end. A good example is Afghanistan, where they burnt through $2 trillion and they left after 20 years left a lot of kit to the Taliban.
Which is now one of the best armed armies in the world.
But I think that's the thing also, is that even the cases we're speaking of Ukraine or Palestine and the devastating effect, that's what can actually be accounted for, right? Because that's what they've declared, we're doing this. So that can be accounted for. So which means, and that's already terrible, whatever is not being accounted for is going to even worse means, like you were saying, and that's why they can't, it's not that they can't account for it. They can, I believe. It's just that doing so publicly, accounting for it publicly, reveals like a much more terrible web than we already know. And we've seen this, like how they support destabilization of countries by supporting armed factions and all of that. So yeah, it's just, I think, just basically just trying to hide their own crimes.
Yeah.
It's not.
I mean, let's look at the African context. So many of our leaders have become US allies straight after coming to power. And the question is, did the US support them into coming to power in the first place? Bola Ahmed Tinubu, a lot of Nigerians will say yes. William Ruto, a lot of Kenyans will say yes. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Now the US, according to its constitution, it can't back military juntas, but there's a lot of evidence that they were backing el-Sisi when Morsi was still in power. So these are the things that can't be accounted for. Because you have one rule that says we can't back military junta, but then the military junta comes into power and they have elections where they get 98% of the vote, and all of a sudden they're your closest allies. Is that just circumstance of history, or did you make that happen? And this is is this part of the 850 billion that can't be accounted for? We mentioned it in our editorial meeting a few days ago. Felix Tshisekedi in Congo, he ran on a ticket of going after Paul Kagame. Ran on a ticket of going after, calling Paul Kagame the Hitler, etc., etc. Since he's coming to power, he's done absolutely nothing. He signs a useless peace agreement, which is about removing Rwandan troops from the Congo, when the biggest force, the most destructive force, is the M23 rebels, which has about 100,000 men, which is clearly ran by Rwanda, but Rwanda denies any connection to it, so it's not part of the peace agreement. So we have this situation where we have constant destabilization of the most mineral-rich country in the world, and it looks like the problem is going to get solved. It looks like a politician's going to come in and solve this issue, but the problem persists because it serves the imperialist agenda. It serves the agenda of the global global capitalist. And so this is what I'm more concerned about. Yeah, the American taxpayer is clearly getting done over, but we're getting done over. We want an audit of where the 850 billion annually is being spent in our continent on what. That's what we want an audit for. You are the world's superpower. You have veto right at the UN Security Council. You have special privileges at the IMF, special privileges at the World Bank. You get to dictate whether African Stream can be on Instagram. You get to dictate whether African Stream can be on Facebook. Who gets to hold you accountable? Your own government agencies are clearly incapable and not even trying. She's laughing and speaking to him this way in front of an audience. William, if I lent you 500 Kenyan shillings and you spoke to me this way,
Impossible,
Last of it.
do you know what I'm saying? Let alone in front of people.
400 billion.
In front of people. If we was in a coffee shop and I was like, bro, what happened to my 500? And you was giving me these answers, people would be looking out like, this guy must be crazy. But the confidence.
I think just to add real quickly, I think there's again, back to language. I Googled this earlier looking for Pentagon corruption. Nothing came up. Like literally, it didn't come up. It literally did not come up. And it's just, it also shows how they control mainstream media. Because if this was happening if it was, Ruto, although he's already aligned, if it was Ruto, that would be all over.
Yeah.
If it was any African leader or Eastern leader, it would be all over. Another thing is how it's also said as Pentagon corruption when America is a military-industrial complex, and that's how the whole system or the government is based. Why is it the U.S. government cannot account for this? Why is it somehow distant, as if the Pentagon is a whole
different entity
on its own?
And just to illustrate your point, I remember how shocked people were, especially U.S. citizens, to discover that they had troops in Niger, in Niamey. And they only knew because I think about 17 Marines or troops got into a firefight, and about I think 4 of them were killed. And then suddenly people were like, we have troops in Niger? Like, we don't even know where Niger is. It could be...
Kamala Harris can say on the campaign trail, we are the only administration that's not in an active war.
And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world. The first time this century. What? But let's understand. So where the are we right now?
And then there's troops in major bases like, what the hell are we doing here?
What are we doing here?
Do you know what I mean? Like the disconnect between the public understanding of what their military does abroad and what's actually happening is so vast. It's so vast. But anyway, let's see what else she has to say. Oh, one final point before we move on. I think it'd be an interesting thing to do. We can maybe put some B-roll. There's 54 African countries according to the AU. 55 if you include Western Sahara. I bet you can put in all 54 countries' names. Sudan, corruption.
Yeah.
Ghana, corruption. Nigeria, corruption.
Yeah.
I bet you could put in corruption next to each one of these names, and there's 4 or 5 articles. 4 or 5 articles. Now put in US corruption, put in British corruption, put in French corruption, put in Dutch corruption, nothing will come up.
And
I
they
think,
even warn us against corruption. We want to warn Kenya.
They'll even fund you to fight corruption. And I think it's interesting that in the rankings, the US is actually number 24 out of 180 in terms. Basically, it's the 24th least corrupt country. But I'm sure in all of these African countries, if you combine all of them together, I don't think they'd fail or do as bad as failing an $800 billion audit. So how do countries that lose much less money to corruption get ranked as somehow more corrupt than the US, which has lost trillions if you're looking at since the 90s?
So an audit is exactly what you just described, which is, do I know what was delivered to which place?
Right.
The ability to pass an audit or the fact that the DoD has not passed an audit is not suggestive of waste, fraud, and abuse. That is completely false right there. So
what is
now
it
it's a question of, it's suggestive that we don't have an accurate inventory that we can pull up of what we have where.
Just bad admin.
Yeah, I mean, but yet McDonald's has it. If we go to Java House, the coffee shop down there, they'll have an inventory. But we're expected to believe, out of the 850 billion, they couldn't put 1 billion aside just to do the audit. They clearly do have an audit. They clearly do have an audit. It's the same way that, with the mafia, when they're trying to skim money away from the IRS, they keep a record of it, but they just take things off the list. So the IRS doesn't. That's it. That's it. They know to the penny everything that's been spent. I'm certain of that. I'm certain of that. It's just they're not willing to share that.
What it was spent on.
Actually, I was reading an article on The Nation. Basically, it says the Pentagon, there's that, annual budget where if they don't spend all that money, they have to give the rest of it back. But what they do is they take the money and shift it to another 5-year fund. I think they call it the merged trust or something. I'll have to check it up or put it as B-roll. But basically, this is money that they use to fund covert operations. And it said at some point they had a slush fund of around $50 billion for off-the-book programs, which, like the Niger one, for example. So, yeah.
That is not the same as saying we can't do that because waste, fraud, and abuse has occurred.
So, in my world, that's waste.
How is that waste?
If I give you $1 billion and you can't tell me what happened to it, that to me is wasteful. That means you are not responsible. But if you can't tell me where it went, then what am I supposed to think? And when there has been reporting, this is not, look, I'm not saying this is on you and that you caused this, but I think it's a tough argument to
I'm pretty
make
sure I
that
didn't cause it.
an 850.
He's even trying to be nice to her. And
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
giving
she's
anything.
not trying at all.
She's trying her best to be
Piss him
so
off.
dislikable.
Yeah.
He's trying his best. He's trying to say, listen, I know it's not you, but this is indication of corruption. Of course, it's not evidence there's corruption. It's just a strong indication.
Yeah.
I'm married. If I don't spend the night in my house and my wife says to me, where was you last night? I can say, I can't tell you. But I also I can't then be angry when she jumps to her own conclusion.
For sure.
Yeah?
For sure,
Yeah.
If I say, listen, I just can't tell you, but it doesn't mean I was cheating. So you can't prove I was cheating. Yeah, she can't prove I was cheating, but she's going to strongly suspect it.
If you weren't doing something wrong, why are you not telling me where you were?
Exactly.
Why are you defensive?
Yeah, why are you defensive? Especially if I was laughing and then, do you know what cheating is? Do you know what cheating is? I don't think you know what
It's so
spell cheating.
frustrating.
Spell it.
But that's why I think it's not just arrogance in what she's saying. She's fully aware of what he is saying.
Yeah.
It's just that she cannot answer those questions.
Yeah.
She's
And
cornered.
so even the laughs are not really laughs out of arrogance. They're more out of nervousness of being aware of what is being said, but wanting to pretend or be oblivious
all
or
cool.
act oblivious to it.
Filibusters.
Just to
what they call
show
it.
time.
Yeah, yeah. You just keep talking. You know the interview's going to last a certain amount of time,
And it'll be done.
and it'll be done. Nothing's going to happen. Afterwards, your boss will give you a pat on the back and say, good job. That's it. You didn't give him anything. We keep it moving.
Yeah.
An $850 billion budget to an organization that can't pass an audit and tell you where that money went, like, I think most people would consider that somewhere in the realm of waste, fraud, or abuse, because they would wonder why that money isn't well accounted for. And especially when they see food insecurity on military bases, and they see...
You want to talk about that? Because that's a good, we should be talking, I mean,
Well,
I'm
it's
trying to
also-
understand
it's-
where you're trying to go, other than the
It's a distraction
dollars,
from the
which would
corruption.
really
Well,
bother you.
I think it doesn't really bother
The
me. I
dollars
think it's
really
all
bother you. Like, I think they bother the homeless people sleeping under the bridges. That's who's bothered by the dollars. He's a multi-millionaire.
Most of them veterans,
Yeah, I don't think he gives a damn about the dollars. He's a multi-millionaire, but he's speaking on behalf of the people that.
Veterans, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah, the dollars
Homeless.
which will make a difference if you're having 2 meals a day, 3 meals a day, or 1 meal a day.
But I think even if people were not suffering, let's
Yeah.
just hypothetically
Yeah.
say people were not suffering, you're a whole government, right? You're a whole government. If any business, if African Stream, was in U.S. soil and we couldn't account for business expenditures, or this couldn't work just because we can't account for it doesn't mean we wasted it or spent it wrong.
Or
We'd be
hiding
shut
the
down
money.
immediately.
Yeah.
So why can a small business be shut down immediately for failing audits when a whole government can just do what she's doing?
Well, here in Kenyan soil, we have to do an audit at the end of the year for the KRA, Kenyan
Revenue Authority.
Revenue Authority. The accountant explained to me, if I don't have a receipt, it has to be declared profit. So if I lose one receipt, that is counted as profit and I have to pay taxes
on
on
it.
that.
Ooh.
I can't say to them, sorry,
Got
Just
rained on.
can't, yeah.
I can't even show them the bank transaction.
That's
I'm
not
saying?
enough, yeah.
That's not enough. I have to show them the physical receipt. And this is us. We're a company of 10, 12 people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I could come up with the same line of reasoning and just say, just because I don't have the receipt doesn't
mean I'm
mean
hiding money.
But I don't think I'll get very far.
Bother me, I think it's all connected.
Okay.
I think
tell
when
me,
I
tell
look...
me that story. Tell me how you're thinking
Well,
about that.
when I see a State Department get a certain amount of money and a military budget be 10 times that, and I see a struggle within government to get people like more basic services, and then that department that got that, I mean, we got out of 20 years of war and the Pentagon got a $50 billion raise. Like, that's shocking to me. Now, I may not understand exactly the ins and outs and the incredible magic of an audit, but I'm a human being who lives on the earth and can't figure out how $850 billion to a department means that the rank and file still have to be on food stamps. Like, to me, that's fucking corruption. I'm sorry. And if that blows your mind, and if you think like that's like a crazy agenda for me to have. I really think that that's institutional thinking, and that it's not looking at the day-to-day reality of the people that you call the greatest fighting force in the world. So I get back to this idea of like, I'm not looking to pick a fight with you, but I am surprised at that the reaction to these questions are, you don't know what an audit is, bucko. Like, that's just weird to me.
Okay.
Imagine if she was on the opposite. If she was the one asking these questions to, say, an African leader or
they'd have a field day with that, man.
It wouldn't work, her, line of answers.
Yeah.
I mean, she only acknowledged or showed any humility when she realized the audience was there, when they started clapping.
Yeah.
Before that, she was just getting more and more confident in batting down very serious and reasonable questions. But yeah, you've done some research on this beyond what we've seen in the interview. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So the greatest fighting force in the universe commissions a lot of things to keep it supplied for all its many operations around the world. I mean, they've got about 750 bases spread out in the world, and I came across one instance where they were being asked about paying $90,000 for a bag of fasteners.
What?
And in
bag
another
of what?
case, fasteners like screws.
Oh, yeah.
Something that you can pick up in a store for maybe $50.
Yeah, Target,
Bucks.
in the US,
Way
Walmart.
less.
Yeah, like a Walmart store, yes.
Yeah,
$10,000 toilet seats
Jesus.
that are fixed on like one of the military planes. $10,000 for a toilet seat cover, not even a toilet seat. Just a toilet seat
That's
cover.
crazy.
Yeah, a $600 Hamas. It's crazy the amounts that they quote for equipment and kit.
Basically
And
corruption.
It just informs you that there's a whole chain of people who feed off the Pentagon budget, off the books, and that's why they have these inflated costs for equipment.
William, do you think there's a trickle-down effect on these types of things? So we've talked in depth on previous shows in the office many times about the corruption here in Kenya. But the Kenyan state, we have symbolic independence, flag independence, but it's been captured. William Ruto was warned by the IMF, we need you to implement these structural readjustment programs, but when you implement these structural readjustment programs, this will cause civil unrest. Yeah? Which civil unrest means his job's at
risk.
stake.
Yeah.
But then at risk, but then still, he still pushes forward. So like, this corruption, it's not a consequence, it's part of the system.
Yes.
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 From top to bottom.
Yeah.
It's corrupt over there, they install a corrupt leader.
Yeah.
The extraction from this state is based on corruption. Anyone like you or Kenneth, I say these two because they're Kenyan, we're not, who wants to change, will never get anywhere close to the corridors of power.
Yeah.
This is the system.
Yeah.
The system
Like
is
an
corrupt.
ecosystem.
From the fountain of which the well comes from is poisoned.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Because, for example, if you look at the two-horse race narrative that's been pretty common since at least the 90s in Kenya, where if you are the third force, forget about your chances of making it to power. And the media plays a role in this, the West plays a role in this, because this is where we get it from. The previous elections were between Trump, Harris, and figures like Jill Stein and Claudia. But these other fringe figures
don't have any debating opportunities.
Yes, don't get the same level of coverage in media, don't get the same level of exposure. So just narrowing down to these two very corrupt figures. And then looking at Ken's example, and $95,000 for a toilet seat. That's the very same thing that happens here. A corrupt government issues a tender. You come tell the big man, look, I know this pen costs 10 shillings or $1, but I'm going to quote it at $200. There is 10% for you. That's the exact same thing happening in the US, because I'm pretty sure the guy who got the tender for the $95,000 toilet seat, $10,000. He has a good chance to again come back in the US government in whatever capacity. So if the US acts in this way and the local or Africans, a lot of Africans consider them to be an example of democracy, then these are the very same examples of democracy that they'll implement on their people. But they don't really work for the people, they work for the elite.
And we inherited a state from the colonial government, and the colonial government was corrupt to its core.
Yeah.
It's a very good point, because in Africa, in almost every election, Western-style democracy, the best funded campaign wins the election. The one that has the most faces on the most billboards wins the election.
Yeah.
So then it speaks back to these 850. Who helps gets the billboard, the faces on the billboards? Who helps fund these campaigns? 2019 in Congo, the elections, widely accepted as corrupt and rigged. One of the first Western governments to congratulate Felix Tshisekedi on the result was the US. Is that a coincidence? And the third party example is such a good point, because they get no coverage. So then, even though if you were to show people their manifestos,
this is what they want to implement,
they would almost always vote for the manifesto of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the Green Party. But they think, I'm just wasting my vote because these guys are not going to win. Who gives them the impression that this vote can't win? And then we have the same here. We have Raila and Ruto. And there's better candidates, but people think, well, these are the only people. If I vote for one of these other candidates,
wasted votes.
It means that the lesser of two evil might lose. So we're inheriting a system that's predicated on finances, that then uses the election result to extract finances away from the people. And there's no way we can, what was the word that you used at the beginning? Decompose. There's no way we can decompose our system from the money. And there's no way that we can ever liberate ourselves where there's all these financial interests in giving us the condition that we're in. That's why all of this is linked, I'd argue.
I like the word decompose because it has death, connotations of death. And we're looking at the slow death of the US hegemon. A lot of people have compared it to the end days of the Roman Empire, when it was overextended and we had all these legions spread out across the then known world, in Judea, in the Far East, in Europe, and they had to keep the armies supplied and send as much loot back to Rome as they could. And the more they extended, the more the expenses rose, the more they had to keep people subjugated. Eventually, the beast consumed itself, the empire collapsed. I think the same analogy can be applied to the Anglo-American Empire as of now.
I totally agree, and kind of see it in the USSR fashion, where the US basically, their thing was, we'll bankrupt the USSR, we'll spend so much on military, which means they'll have to spend so much on military, and in the end, one of us will have to break. So I think after the US made or contributed to the collapse of the USSR, it's now going in that direction, because while you're losing, 800 billion, a trillion a year, people back home don't get anything. And outside of the United States, even that American muscle is not really what it used to be. Because I think if it were 2003 US with Bush, maybe Niger could have been occupied by now. So even with all this money, there really isn't much to show for it. And just adding to the example, like, the toilet seats or the fasteners, a method which was identified as a way for these departments to basically siphon money away from the American people was that when they quote, say, inflation figures for weapons, they say, next year a single rifle might cost this much, and then when the rifle ends up costing far less, they don't really revise the figures or take back the money, which goes back to the point of, this is money which is used to fund these secret programs, support regime change operations, and all that.
Since you mentioned Niger, there was a historical conference that happened last week. We sent Inam Richardson there. She represented us Africans. She did a fantastic job. Met many revolutionary movements from across Africa and across the world, who all went into Niamey to support the revolutionary process. And I went on Google and I was trying to see if there was anything on the Western media.
Nothing.
And there was something on Sky News, the military dictatorships sweeping through the Sahel, and it was about how problematic these dictatorships are.
Yeah.
I'm going to circle back to the conversation that we had before about Western democracies. The reason why people are excited, it's not that we love men in military uniform, but we understand that our countries are not sovereign. They've been captured.
Yeah.
If we're going to have a democracy under these conditions, where the best funded campaign wins, where there's all these multinational corporations and institutions and mining companies who have these interests that fund a campaign, under those situations, we're never going to have a leader that represents us.
Yeah.
So the reason why we're putting our support behind Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, they're going through a stage of real decolonization. Not the type of stuff that you see in Western universities where they take this book out and they throw it into the dustbin, which is good, but it's small
not
scale.
an end in itself. Yeah.
Real decolonization. In Niger, we saw the mining contract with Orania scrapped. In Mali, we saw mining contracts with some of these gold mines scrapped. In Burkina Faso, we're seeing some of these media institutions, France 24, Radio France, all these other things kicked out because they're the propaganda arm of the mining companies, and they're constantly feeding to the people. These mining companies are good. Don't forget the fact that you're paid $1 a day, $2 a day. It's better than getting paid nothing a day.
Yeah.
So this is why we're supporting. We realise for us to have the type of state and country that we want, to uplift the masses that we want, we need to go through a process of decolonization. And once we're sovereign states, independent sovereign states, then we can have the type of elections which are really free and fair, not going to the highest bidder.
Yeah, I think just still on that point, there's something you mentioned sometime last year. Basically, we need to take back democracy from what the West perceives it to be. For them, it's, after every 4 or 5 years, you go, vote, and then go home. As Toure said, that's the height of political irresponsibility. Politics shouldn't be just a one-off affair. It should be like a daily engagement. And, the West says it's a military dictatorship, a military junta. But look at the interest of the people of the Sahel. We want our resources to ourselves, or Rano gets kicked out. We don't want presence of the same people who colonized us still staying here militarily. The French were kicked out. That is democracy because it represents what the people want. Yeah. Let's look at Kenya in comparison. If you ask the US, they'll say, yeah, you guys voted in 2022, very democratic, so this is a democratic country. But Kenyans did not want the finance bill, which was backed by the IMF. It was still bulldozed. It took the deaths of like 60-something people for that bill to be taken out. And it's still being shoved in small bits. So these companies like Finlay's, which own tens of thousands of acres of land, and as of now, they even cause unemployment because they're bringing machines, which means they no longer have to pay for these services to the local communities. If you ask these local communities, they tell you, we want our lands back, because in the first place, these companies did not legitimately get hold of this land. This is land we were dispossessed from. But Ruto's administration will tell you, but we need the money. This is a company that generates dollars, and as a country, we need dollars. But that does not represent the interests of the people.
Or the community that lives next to the British military base.
If you
do a referendum,
yeah.
Do you want this British military base next to this community? Do you want British soldiers to be immune from the law? Do you want there to be cases of rape never investigated? Do you want there to be many women who are raising children, single mothers with no support from the British military or the personnel? None of that is democratic.
Yeah.
This woman is second in command of one of the most important institutions in the US. She's spending $850 billion. Nothing democratic about it. The most democracy that you saw was that the audience clapped and she kind of smirked at them. Yeah. That's about as democratic as it gets for these officials. There might be a little bit of public pressure in the form of a Q&A. That's it. That's it.
Just this week alone, we had 2 countries, Senegal and Chad, coming out and saying that they don't want the French in their countries anymore. Actually, Chad has cancelled their military accord with France. And Senegal's president said that he doesn't see the reason why the French should still be in Senegal at this point. And that's just to say that a lot of African countries are now waking up,
Yes.
following the lead of the Sahelian states, to tell the US and the French and all the rest of them to pack up and go, so that we can build partnerships based on mutual interest.
Yeah.
Partnerships that actually do benefit us. Biden is going to Angola, I think, before he leaves office. And I would like to see a picture of him maybe commissioning a road or an airport that the US has actually funded and built. I don't think I'll be waiting to see that, because most of the roads in Angola are built by the Chinese. He might actually be getting driven on a Chinese-built road, and end up staying in a Chinese-made hotel. Just showing that the US has really not built Africa. They have extracted and bombed and destroyed the little that we have. And those are not the kind of partnerships that we need going forward.
Yeah, and this money that is leaked, or this money that they can't account for, is the same money that is being used to subjugate Africa, basically. Yeah.
This is another issue. So President Faye in Senegal, he got elected on a very radical program. As soon as he got elected, we saw capitulation, and we saw him compromise on so much of that radical program. Again, because the economy of Senegal is controlled externally. So the threats that were issued directly and indirectly made this guy realize that anything that we have to do in stealth and through the back door, even though he's the president of the country. How is that? How is you tell people we're gonna get rid of this, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do
and
this.
that's what the people voted.
And that's what the people vote for.
Yeah.
As soon as you come into power, your economic advisors say, listen, if you can't have this hard rupture with the former colonial power. If you do, this is what they're gonna do, and you'll be out of power. Before you know it, there'll be a colour revolution, you'll be out of power in 2 years.
But I think also I think that this is a theory. There's also an understanding within the Western world that Africans as a people are now waking up, and that wool is no longer over our eyes in the same way. And so I think even their strategies are now becoming different, which is putting people in front of us that will say what we want to hear, right? Because one thing I find very strange and interesting is that when Nana Akufo was, elected, and for the first time in 60 years, a French president visited Ghana, which was Emmanuel. And during that presser that they had, Akufo seemed very Pan-African, said all these things about how, the IMF should leave and we don't need the Western aid the same way and our relationships need to be different. Only for him to be honored a week and a half ago with the highest French award. And I'm like, there's no way you would get that if you were truly a Pan-African. No Pan-African is ever given, an award. Do you think Traore right now would be honored by England, given an OBE, or they would never get that. So I think there's also people amongst us that are not with us.
For sure.
I'm not saying who isn't, but yeah.
And he went on to then go on take IMF loans, so it was all just lip service.
And even in his, he put up a post basically, celebrating this award, and he said the award is reserved for individuals that have shown service to France. And I'm like, what service have you shown to France?
What should we know?
What don't we know? What do you want to tell us?
Why should a Ghanaian president
serving France?
Yeah.
Why should a Ghanaian president?
Especially very knowing what kind of nation France is.
Yeah. I mean, he gave that speech, didn't he? To US officials.
The Russian.
Tell them come, the Russians are at my door.
We need to do something about it. The greatest example of what he just gave is probably William Ruto at the UN. He gave a speech justifying the Kenyan deployment. You would have thought it was Marcus Garvey speaking.
Yes.
Honestly,
literally.
It was fascinating because he clearly knew the issues of Pan-Africanism,
yeah.
and he knew the plight of Haitians.
And the history behind it.
So he did something very, very sophisticated. He said, Haiti has been exploited by external power, without ever mentioning who those
Who they
external
are.
powers are.
Because it's
if he
taking money
does,
from
you'd
them.
have to say, those are the same external powers are the ones that are
Funding
footing
the
the bill
mission.
for the mission.
Yeah.
So he gave this amazing speech about how Haiti is in this situation, and it's no fault of Haitians, but of external powers. Then went on to say, so that's why we're going to Haiti to help them. Missed a few key details. The people that are sending us there are the same people that have kept their foot on Haiti's neck
yeah.
since the French left. All right, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think language, we need to stop calling the West a democracy. They
Oh,
are
for
not.
sure. Yeah.
That is really just that simple. We need to start calling them in the same terms, because how would you congratulate a leader that the people are rejecting, say in Kenya? If Ruto won again today in the re-election, the Kenyans will be on the streets because they don't want him again. But the US would congratulate him.
So long as he serves their interest.
Whereas in Mali, Niger, the people are celebrating, the leaders, but the US is basically vilifying them. So is it really about the people? Absolutely not. So you don't actually believe in democracy. You just give us good words that you think are good, and you live in a democracy when really it's a dictatorship.
I think I'll start by renaming the Department of Defense.
It's this.
The Department of Offense for all the chaos and mayhem and death they've caused in the world.
Department of Death.
And then there's
DOD.
Elon Musk is now in charge of
Efficiency.
Government
Doge.
efficiency.
Department of Government Efficiency.
Yes. Now I put up a tweet. He's mentioning all the government corruption. I bet he doesn't touch the Pentagon.
He won't.
He
Yeah,
won't
I
touch the
bet you I
Pentagon.
won't. Yeah.
That is.
That says everything. They're not interested in basically the audit or ever passing it.
Yeah.
I think for me it's basically this small issue of the Pentagon not passing its audit should awaken us, as Sanaria said, for example, not just to stop referring to the West as democracy, but to analyze or to question everything that comes out of the West. Because, for example, as I said, mentioned initially, the US is the 24th least corrupt country. But what other country sheds $800 billion unaccounted for a year? But for them, they're a democracy and they're not corrupt. So
It also
make it
ranks
make
very high
sense.
in terms of press freedoms, despite shutting us down.
Assange,
With
Snowden,
enough, yeah.
African Stream.
We're not anti-democratic. I don't want anyone to misunderstand that. We just believe in democracy in a true sense. That things that affect people's lives, they should have a say in it, and they should have a real say in it. Not once every 4 or 5 years, where the mainstream media tells you who you should vote for and who you shouldn't vote for, and who's unelectable, so that if you vote for them, you're wasting your voice.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay, we'll leave it there. It's been a good show. I've been Ahmed Cabello.
William Sakawa.
Scenario.
Can we
Until next time, peace.